Assalamu alaikum and hello everyone. I'm your host Hena Zuberi and welcome back to another episode of Justice for All Now. Today we're going to be talking about Kashmir. So a newly introduced domicile law has been imposed on the Indian-occupied Kashmir and is causing an upheaval amongst many who are already enduring security restrictions forced by the Indian government. While Kashmiris have had the right to education, jobs, and territory, which many implied a sense of autonomy, much of that has drastically changed in August of 2019, when the BJP-led Indian government decided to revoke Kashmir's special semi-autonomous status. Things were further escalated in March of this year when the domicile laws were introduced, which then dramatically changed who can permanently inhabit Jammu and Kashmir. The Al Jazeera reports that the new laws allow Indian citizens who have lived in Jammu and Kashmir for 15 years to claim a domicile certificate for residency benefits, as well as those who have studied there for 7 years. Children of central government officials who worked in Jammu and Kashmir for at least 10 years can also apply, even if they have never set foot in the territory. So, to discuss a lot of this and to break it down for us, as well as some of the new updates from the ground, the roles of mosques, how they're reacting to changes, and especially news that I know a lot of our audience is concerned about is the opening of liquor stores in Kashmir Valley and how that is going to affect what Kashmir looks like. So this is something that we wanted to touch on. Currently, 67, I believe, different liquor store locations in Kashmir have been, and I guess this is something to attract. I don't know. I don't know what this means. And to answer all these questions that a lot of us have, is my guest today. His name is Mirza Saib Beg. Saib is a Kashmiri lawyer. He's a gold medalist graduate and the former president of the Students' Union at Nalsar University in law. He's presently in the United Kingdom to study public policy at the Blavatnik School of Government at the University of Oxford. He has lectured on Kashmir in various spaces in UK, including at the University of Cambridge, University of Oxford, SOAS, and the University of Westminster, as well as in India, included places like Tata Institute of Social Sciences, the University of Mumbai, the University of Kashmir, Bombay Press Club, etc. He's written extensively on the domicile law for The Wire, and this particular article was shared over 250,000 times in the last month. So thank you so much for being here, Syed. Am I pronouncing that right?
Yes, that's right. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. Can you tell us a little bit before we start? I like to get to know my guests better. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and the work that you've been doing.
Okay. As you said, I'm a Kashmiri lawyer. I was born in Kashmir. I've done my initial schooling and education in Kashmir itself, and I went to study law in India. And this was this was my first time when I was staying for a longer period of time in India. Otherwise, most of my travel in India was just in transition while going to Kashmir or coming out of Kashmir. So I studied law in India, and I was working as a lawyer in Mumbai for 6 years before I came to London. And in that, in my role as a professional lawyer, I would engage in free legal aid for Kashmiris who required legal help. Even right now, there are cases in various courts in India that I've been a part of where I've drafted petitions or I have given legal advice. But some of the more public work that I've been involved in over the last 1 year has been countering the propaganda that is used to subjugate us, because we do not have platforms from where we can voice what is happening in Kashmir, or from where we can even counter what is being said about us. So over the last 1 year, for example, Jay Panda, who is the national vice president of the BJP, he came to the House of Lords in UK and he made a very propagandist statement which was baseless. It was wrong in fact, wrong in law, and I took it upon myself to counter him over there. Similarly, say when the Indian ambassador to Turkey, when he wrote a piece in TRT, basically arguing why India had amended Article 370, how this was good for anti-terrorism measures and how this was good for the people of Kashmir. I wrote against that to counter him. And again, on various issues where they use LGBTQ rights, they use women's rights against us. They argue that Ambedkar, who's one of the founding fathers of the Indian Constitution, they argue that he would have wanted Article 370 to go, and it's an incorrect argument. All of these are either half truths or outright lies. So I'm trying to engage in this space where we create a counter narrative and we present the other side, we present our side, in fact, of what is happening. And we assert our space. We're not people who can be bought and sold. We have free will. We will exercise that will and we'll present our view. So that is one of the more public tasks that I've been doing in the last 1 year. Otherwise, my work is consistent. I'm every single day I'm involved in work on Kashmir, in Kashmir, some of which is already in public and some of which we're engaged in right now.
Okay. So, and this doesn't come without sacrifice. It doesn't come. So even just today, this morning, your Twitter feed was on fire. You had shared a newspaper article about Bhutan, right? And so you have plenty of trolls after you. So what does that, how does it feel to be Kashmiri in today's, not only is the physical space closed off on you, the digital space is closing up on Kashmiris as well. So I'd really like to, I've been looking at and.
Well, you see, we always face threat. The moment as a Kashmiri you take a stand, you are effectively challenging the power structure of the oppressor. The moment you challenge the power structure of the oppressor, see, even when I acknowledge oppression against me, even if I don't challenge the oppression, if I just acknowledge that I am oppressed, I am facing a direct and immediate threat to my life, even the mere acknowledgement of that oppression will legitimize violence against me. So the oppressor will then use different kinds of language depending on how much violence they want to legitimize against me. They may call a person like myself a terrorist. They may call me brainwashed. They may call me a Pakistani agent. Anything to delegitimize my agency, to completely dismiss what I'm trying to say. In fact, today, thank you for pointing this out, because this is quite interesting. I had shared an article which was published about a development in Bhutan, where the article was alleging that maybe Bhutan has blocked off water supply to India. Now, whether this article is authentic or not is a matter of debate. We can discuss it. I'm not taking a position as a Kashmiri Muslim over there. I'm just pointing out that maybe India's foreign policy needs rethinking, which is true, not just in the case of Bhutan, but if you look at the recent developments with China, with Pakistan, the whole SAARC region in general, how India has been very belligerent with its neighbors, mostly because of its economic might. So it's gotten away with a lot of things that have irked its neighbors. Look at how Nepal has done a U-turn on India and how the things are turning over there. So that was the philosophical premise that I was trying to build over there, that India needs a rethink of its foreign policy. But I was quite viciously attacked on religion, on things that are very personal to Muslims, abusing the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, abusing the fact that alcohol is haram for me, or pork is, they use this against you in a way to sort of shock you, because this would, for any Muslim, this is going to anger you and throw you off balance. But you see, I've grown up in India. I have lived amongst Indians. I know that many Indians do not ascribe to this line of attack, but there is an overwhelming acceptance for attacking Muslims at every single level. Indian Muslims are often attacked at a level where they are not considered Indian, and Kashmiri Muslims are attacked where they are called terrorists or they are delegitimized altogether. So even in India, when I've done events on Kashmir, there has been physical violence. And so the threat of online attacks, it doesn't really bother me that much because it's just online. There's no physical attack taking place. But it does, at a psychological level, make you wonder that these are people who are using openly misogynistic, openly Islamophobic remarks, which are very abusive, and they think that this is okay. This is something that is acceptable in society. In fact, not just with me. If I can give you the example of just to give you a flavor of the kind of language that is prevalent in national mediums in India. A couple of months ago, a retired army general was on national television in India, where he was speaking to a female panelist from Kashmir, and he made the argument that in Kashmir, people deserve rape for rape. So he was trying to allude to an allegation that Kashmiris had raped non-Muslims, and therefore Kashmiri women also should be raped now. And this was made on national television. There was no, he did not face any repercussions for this. So this is very normalized language. And so what you're seeing on my Twitter feed today, where people are talking about very personal issues, very personal things with respect to Islam, in a way to attack me and say that this person is paid by Pakistan. And in fact, on that point, Indians who attack you on these lines, they would like to believe that everyone is paid by the ISI. They like to believe that the Guardian, the New York Times, the Washington Post, people like myself, we're all funded by the ISI. But if the ISI has that much money and influence, then it really begs a rethink on what Indians are doing. I mean, but yeah, I mean, this on a lighter note. But yes, you're absolutely right that as Muslims we face oppression in India because of identity. But as Kashmiri Muslims, the level of oppression is an altogether different. The level is altogether different against us, because an Indian Muslim may at best be attacked verbally, but in recent months even physically. But a Kashmiri Muslim can be eliminated without questions being asked.
And this has gone on not just like, so when we were talking about Indian media, there's been like, for example, there was just such blatant histrionics almost about and this what you've talked about, pinkwashing, you've talked about women's rights being used in India. Can you give us some examples, like because this is something particularly concerning, because that is how wars were justified. The war on terror has been justified in Afghanistan and other places as well. So this is the savior of Kashmiri women while speaking about their rape at the same time. This is it's hard to watch, it's hard to stomach, but it also doesn't the havoc that it wreaks on the ground. So if you could speak to that.
Well, there are two different aspects to it. One is what is happening to Indian Muslims. The second is what's happening to Kashmiri Muslims. They're both facing oppression, but our struggles are different, and our objectives in our struggle are also different. So what is unfolding in India right now, it is basically an authoritarian regime that is imposing its own puritanical definition of nationhood. They have an imagination of who an ideal citizen is going to be. And they are imposing that on everyone, in Kashmiri Muslims as well as Indian Muslims. And this definition is specifically designed to exclude all Muslims in India. But there will be different levels of exclusion. If you look at the NRC, CAA Act that had been passed, the Citizenship Amendment Act that had been passed a couple of months ago, that's also singularly designed to work against Muslims in India, and also against people who come from vulnerable communities, but specifically against Muslims. So since 2014, there is an active zeal with which Muslims are being targeted, with which they're being, Muslims are being right now, if I may say, they're being re-educated about their place in society, where India is openly calling for a Hindu Rashtra. And that is not just a call, it is being effected also by rarely punishing lynch mobs, by dispossessing Muslims of our spaces of worship. Look at what happened to Babri Masjid. By changing the names of places which had a Muslim name. For example, Allahabad was changed to Prayagraj. And what I really want to point out over here, that even this call for a Hindu Rashtra, Indians must rethink, Indians must introspect. Does a Hindu Rashtra even create equality for Indians? Look at how Dalits have been treated in India, how scheduled caste, how all the SCs have been treated in India. So a Hindu Rashtra does not even create an equal space for Hindus, let alone what they will do, what they would do to non-Hindus, that is the Muslims.
And that's the call. Like even this, there's that the officials a lot of times with the BJP government will say the domicile law will usher in equality and dignity for all. And this is a talking point that they've been consistently using, and you've been using that for international, liaisons and all of that. But now, so let as a legal scholar, can you break it down for us? What does this domicile law, and because I'd asked Kashmiris this here in the United States, what will that when the CAA came out, how will the CAA affect Kashmir? But at that time, we were told that there was a sort of like I guess people didn't realize what they were planning, and but these domicile laws came in, and they seem very similar to the CAA. So could you explain how that,
Yes.
in terms of their impact?
Sure. So there's again two parts to this question. One is about the CA, how that affects Kashmir. The
Mhm.
second is about the domicile law. Now, it's an incorrect assumption to make, and it had been made by a large number of Kashmiris as well, that the CAA will not really affect Kashmir that much. This was incorrect because after Article 370 was amended, whatever the center would pass would be applicable to Kashmir as well.
Mhm.
And in Kashmir, just like in India, there are many vulnerable communities who don't have documentation. You
Mm,
see, CAA is designed to exclude people who cannot prove their citizenship. Now, this does not mean that they are illegals in India. They're not illegal persons in India or aliens in India. They are actually Indian citizens. It's just that they don't have documentation for it because of the nature of social structure, economic structure in India, because these are very, very marginalized people. To give you to help you pick your audience picture this better, I'm talking about people who spend their entire lives in a slum or living under a flyover in India. And those of you who have visited India or Mumbai, the moment you land in Mumbai, you will see one of the world's largest slums over there. Those people will rarely have documentation to prove their citizenship. They won't
mm,
have a passport, an ID card. Some of them might, but many of them will not. And those are the people who are being caught in the CAA process. Now, after that, those are the people who will be caught in the NRC process.
mhm,
After that, when you have the CAA come in, it was designed to singularly exclude Muslims because it would allow all other religions to come into India, to get legalized in India, except Muslims. So
mm,
they gave different nations around India which have Muslim majority populations, and they selected from them only those populations which are from non-Muslim backgrounds. So that was the CANRC. Now this would also apply to Kashmir, and in Kashmir, anyone who would not be able to qualify under the documentation. For example, Kashmir has nomadic tribes who don't live in one place. Kashmir has many people who have suffered because of the violence that has happened over the last 70 years. There are many orphans in Kashmir whose parentage cannot be identified. There are many people in Kashmir who have lived their entire lives without any documentation.
mm.
Most The good thing is that most Kashmiris have some form of documentation because most Kashmiris own land,
Okay.
as opposed to India, where there is tremendous homelessness and landlessness. To give you an example, even in the most progressive states of India, for example, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, 70 to 80% of Dalits have been landless. India has been an independent nation now for 72 years. So Indians, again, must introspect why they have failed to give their weakest communities any rights, any land. Contrast this with Kashmir, where less than 20% of Dalits are landless.
Mm,
Now, I don't, 20% is not a boastful figure,
mhm,
but compared to the most progressive states of India, where it's as high as 80%,
mhm.
and in some districts as high as 90%, where Dalits suffer political exclusion, they have no land rights, they have no rights in society, and they suffer tremendous casteism as well. So Indians
So,
must question.
so Dalits cannot own land in India, but they can own land in Kashmir.
No, no, it's not. It's not a legal bar that they cannot own land.
Okay.
They can, if they have the means to purchase land, they can purchase land.
Okay.
But the structure has been designed in such a way that through intergenerational shifts, they will never get to a point where they will own. As I'm
Mm,
saying, now it's 72 years after India's independence, and even now, if you have 80% of a particular group which is not owning land, then this is not just an innocuous occurrence. This
that's
is
true.
clearly malicious and organized. It is designed to function. The
Structure.
country is designed to function in this way, where certain groups will be subjugated for the benefit of others. Now,
Okay.
this is for Indians. This is on the Indian side. Now, when I come to the Kashmiri side about what's happening with the domicile law, the domicile law is a smaller version of the NRC process, the CAA process,
Okay.
where, see, for example, I am a permanent resident of Kashmir. I have a state subject certificate, which grants me certain privileges in Kashmir. It gives me the right to own property. It gives me the right to get certain employment in government services.
Mhm.
Now, the reason this is very important is because we don't really have a private sector in Kashmir. It's
Mhm.
a very volatile zone where the internet is often shut for months on an end. There are curfews. There are, all business establishments are shut sometimes months on an end. So we don't have a strong private sector. And in the last, since August 5, in the last 10 months, 9 months now since August 5, there's hardly been any business activity. Because even before the COVID lockdown started, we were already going through one lockdown which was imposed by the Indian government. So all our internal e-commerce, our internal private sector, whatever little we had is destroyed. So
Mm.
the state becomes your single repository of employment. This
Mm.
is why you'll see Kashmiris lining up for jobs offered by the state.
Mm.
And this is something that the state wants to engineer because the state then gets to control all
Yes.
structures. If I control your source of employment, I control you. If I
Mm.
control where your money comes from, there's no other source of employment. You control the people as well. You control what they say. You control how they act, how they behave. Despite that, it is inspirational how Kashmiris have, in over generations, passed on resistance. And what we are doing is not solidarity. We don't express. This is not an act of solidarity. What I am doing is not an act of solidarity with Kashmiris. I am the Kashmiri. I am resisting. This is resistance. So we have been doing this for generations now,
Mm.
and Kashmir has been occupied by various groups over the last, or many centuries now, the last 5 6 centuries. So, but what Indians must understand is that once upon a time, Kashmiris were very soft-hearted people. We don't have any martial tradition. We don't have a fighting tradition in Kashmir as a race, as an ethnicity. But the continued exposure to oppression has really hardened us as well. So Kashmiris don't have any qualms right now. And for any sensible nation, any sensible democracy would understand that by robbing us of every single thing that we had the state subject law, which at least gave us rights to our own properties, our own state. We had an internal structure which was more or less, at least on paper, it was autonomous from Indian interference. It wasn't really autonomous in practice because India controlled everything from elections to the structure of democratic society, that is the courts, the police, the executive, the legislature, everything is controlled. But at least on paper, there was autonomy. So when you have a raw with people of every single thing and you humiliate them, you push them into a corner, what do you expect them to do? You also, at the same time, you create a situation where non-violent, peaceful discourse does not get any results. So when I'm talking like this to you, I'm trying to vocalize, I'm trying to assert my position. If you delegitimize me and dismiss me, call me a terrorist, call me brainwashed, you're really pushing Kashmiris to a wall and they will have nothing left to lose. So, in any sensible nation, this would be a very alarming position to arrive at. But as you can see, the BJP, the ruling party in India right now, it reaps dividends from this kind of a posturing
Mm.
because its support base cheers the degradation and the dehumanization of Kashmiris.
And this is not new, but obviously it's been expanded under this. Now, and I want to go back to this law because it's very troubling. It's not just that they're that they pass. They're trying to change what Kashmir is.
Yes.
What and so and how is that going to happen? Like
Yes.
what really is troubling, I remember someone said this, is that that these same oppressive forces that have been standing outside our doors will now be called Kashmiri. And what does that even mean? Like,
Well, you see, the domicile law, there are some short term adverse effects which we are going to face and some long term ones. The
okay,
short term ones are basically primarily related to employment and ecological disasters that can take place. You
okay,
see, first of all, in Kashmir, there's not a lot of land to go around.
mm,
We only have 30% of our total land area, which is habitable and fit for cultivation. And if you have an influx, an unplanned influx of Indians coming into Kashmir, they will move into the forest zones. And in fact, the state is right now engaging in deforestation,
mm,
where they are trying to set up new industries and make room for these new domiciles to come in. That will have an effect on our living glaciers because in Kashmir we have living glaciers over there. So there will be an ecological disaster. We have already suffered floods a couple of years ago in Kashmir. So they're also engaging in sand mining in areas which are already flood prone. They have given rights to Indians for mining in those regions. No Kashmir. In certain areas, 100% of the tenders have gone to Indians. None of them came to Kashmiris. So we are being robbed of our rights to our state property. We are being robbed of our employment also. So specifically on employment, there are just about 500,000 government jobs. As I mentioned earlier, the state is the largest source of employment in Kashmir. There are only about 500,000 jobs available, of which there are around 7,500 gazetted jobs available. So those 7,500 jobs are the main ones that people will be competing for. But already in Kashmir, there is nearly 25% of our youth is unemployed. So when you have non-Kashmiris, Indians coming in to compete against Kashmiris for those same jobs, obviously our levels of unemployment are going to increase. Indians have been making the argument that let it be a meritorious exercise because whoever is the best should get the job. If Indians are better, then they should get the job over the Kashmiris. But it's not a competition of equals to begin with. Because as I mentioned earlier, we have internet shutdowns for months on an end in Kashmir. Schools are shut down for months on an end. In fact, in the last 10 years, there have been numerous occasions where students have been promoted without any examinations because they never completed their syllabus. They never could attend school. So they were promoted without examinations altogether. So you are expecting these children from a conflict zone to compete against people from India who have no conflict, who have free access to internet, who are living comfortable, normal lives. In fact, this reminds me of a personal experience. When I went to Nalsar University of Law to study law, I met Indians over there who had no experience of conflict, and we were studying conflict. And they would all talk about conflict in very academic language, and they would try to vocalize it. And that language was so alien to me because I had lived this conflict. I know what a bullet sounds like. I know what a gunfire, what a blast sound, what happens to your windows if there's a bomb blast a couple of kilometers, even a couple of kilometers away. I've experienced these things. So the language of conflict, they had no experience of it. And for initially my first few months, I was a little envious of this very blissful life that they had lived, which was, if they'd step out of their homes and get late, their family wouldn't get worried sick whether their children are alive or not, because that would happen to me. I grew up in a time when there were no mobile phones. So my family could not even call me on a mobile phone to ask why I've gotten late. So things like that. You need to, and there's a very dear friend of mine who has told me that conflict experience, it's like a tree that you have to sit under. You can read about this tree in your books. You can read about what kind of fruit it gives and how the fruit tastes. But unless you sit under that tree, under the shade of that tree, you pluck its fruit, you won't understand what these things are. You have to experience it to understand. I know I can write volumes and a number of articles about what is happening in Kashmir. We can talk over here about what's happening in Kashmir, but you need to personally experience the anxiety, the uncertainty of life. That when your child or your loved one steps outside, there is a very real possibility that that child or that loved one may not come back home that night. And just to live with that on a daily basis is something which is very shocking. So now the domicile law, coming back before I digress again on this, just to wrap this up, it affects our jobs, employment, it affects our ecology, but the long-term effect is the one which we are most concerned about, which is the effect on a referendum of Kashmir. Because if you change, you see, a referendum of Kashmir is supposed to be done by the people of Kashmir. Now, when you change the definition of the people of Kashmir, then the referendum is frustrated because the new people who are coming in, Indians who are non-Kashmiris, who are moving into Kashmir, let's assume 20, 30 years down the line, their children will have become a part of our society. They will have become a part of our economic structures, our social structures. They may even have intermarried in Kashmiri society. Although I don't expect that to be a very high number, but there may be some because they will grow up in society and these things will happen. Like even right now, a very small number of Kashmiris do end up marrying Indians as well. Because as people, we don't have differences with Indians or Pakistanis. In fact, we have a lot in common as well. Even if you look at Indians and Pakistanis, they have a lot in common with each other as compared to Pakistanis with Chinese or Indians with Russians or Indians with people from America. There's a lot more common with them. But it's the governments, the way their politics is structured, that is very, very problematic. So even in Kashmiri society, if Indians move in, there will be some intermingling of them into our culture and society and economic structures. And when you get to that point, then it is very difficult to push them out of there then. because you get into a legal debate. Then what are the rights of settlers? So say someone who is a child of a settler 30 years down the line, 40 years down the line, am I legally allowed to push that child out of my territory because that child's parents have come illegally to Kashmir? How do we work it? Of course, there are legal ways of doing this. We can work out, or we can go back to the state subject certificates, we can identify from there, but it's very problematic. It complicates the situation even more. And that's exactly what the Indian government wants to do. They want to create chaos because they don't want there to be clarity. The kind of things I'm discussing with you right now, I will never be allowed to say these things on Indian television, because the moment I say these things, it creates some clarity on what is happening. It creates some understanding. And I have been doing this for many years in India, where I have traveled almost all over India now, where I have tried to reach out to Indian society to tell them that, we don't have any animosity, we don't have any hatred for you per se, but we have a hatred for what you are legitimizing. Your silence is amounting to legitimizing the death of my people in Kashmir. So that is what we are oppressing, and we want you to vocalize. Patriotism does not mean you turn a blind eye to what the country is doing. Stand up for what is right. And there are some Indians who do stand up for Kashmiris, but they're a very small number of people. They're very insignificant in number, and they're also very scared for their own lives, the threats that they face, because they live amongst Indians in India.
Yes, wasn't there even a protest, and then someone had put up just a Free Kashmir sign, and that that person was arrested, and no lawyer would take their case. So even just protesting against atrocity.
It's very, very interesting that you point that out, because I'd spoken to that person myself, and I offered to help her also, to give her free legal aid. Thankfully, we did manage to find some help for her.
Okay.
And she was given a lot of support by people from various sections, various lawyers from various places in India. So she's better now. But of course, you just a simple sign of Free Kashmir, the kind of response it gets. Should the question then be, why not Free Kashmir? If the response, if this is so sensitive, if this is causing such a reaction, you should also use this as an opportunity to ask Indians, okay, if you have a problem with this sign that says Free Kashmir, whether you believe in it or not, whether you think that the idea of independence of Kashmir is delusional, or whether you think it is merely aspirational, but it is an idea over there. So please tell us, why should Kashmir not be free? And it's very interesting, because when the moment Indians engage at that level, you should just tell them about their own freedom struggle. Why should India not be free? If in 1947 India was told the same thing by the British, that you don't deserve freedom because most of your country is illiterate and impoverished. But these are all colonial arguments. Freedom is not an economic argument to make. Freedom is an argument of equality. And that's what Kashmiris are demanding. We want to be treated as equal human beings. We want that our political will should be respected. That's all we want.
Any sort of anti-war movement in Indian civil society, in the sense that, is it just the fact that hundreds and thousands of their troops are in this very tiny place? Does that I'm curious to, and since you've lived in India as well, when is any of that reflected in any, do they show scenes from there, the scenes that we see over here from an occupied Kashmir? Is that shown to regular lay people in India?
It's very filtered. So again, two parts. First part is there an anti-war movement in India? The second is, do Indians actually see what's happening in Kashmir? You see, with respect to your second question first, until the 90s, Indians would outrightly deny any allegation of human rights violations in Kashmir. They'd say this is all fake, this is all just propaganda. But gradually, there was overwhelming evidence that built up that yes, something has happened over there. There have been mass rapes, there have been mass killings, there have been mass graves in Kashmir, unidentified, unmarked graves in Kashmir. So these things have happened over there. Now, when the amount of evidence is so overwhelming that we just cannot refute it merely by saying, oh, this is propagandist, because I'm showing you the bodies, I'm showing you the women are coming forward and they're giving their testimonies that they have been raped. And Kashmir is a very conservative society, where such things, people will not find it. It's not comfortable to talk about such things in any society, but especially in this place where you're so vulnerable. The moment you vocalize about oppression against you, you are officially legitimizing your own family members facing more oppression. So if
Mm.
someone talks about it, then maybe their brother, their father, they might be picked up and tortured or oppressed, or taken to a police station and kept there arbitrarily under detention. So these things do happen over there, but people have spoken up against them. Now we have come to a point where Indians don't outrightly deny it; they
Mhm.
just say that now you deserve it because you are terrorists. Now they're justifying it. So we're at a more dangerous point right now. But
Mm.
this is also because Indians live in this ecosystem of misinformation, which is fed to them by national 24-hour networks, which don't present a Kashmiri perspective. They distort our narrative. They focus on very isolated incidents that justify their positions. If you take any incident out of context, you can justify. For example, one line I can quote over here. Indians who often argue with me, they often use this line that, oh, Kashmiris keep saying, as guess Pakistan, but insan, but no roast but insan, which
Mm.
translates that Kashmiris are asking for Pakistan with the female pandits, without the male pandits. So the argument is that Kashmiris are
Mm.
misogynistic people who want to take female Hindus with
Mhm.
them to Pakistan. Now, this is something which was made as a very isolated remark by a group of boys in Kashmir at some point.
Mhm.
And there's a history to this also. There was a protest. There was a marriage, an intercommunal marriage between a Muslim and a Hindu that led to protests. And in the heat of that protest, some young boys have made this slogan. That does not mean this is a slogan of our movement.
Movement.
Even in the Indian freedom struggle, there have been people who have made very problematic statements. That does not mean the entire struggle is now colored by that statement.
Statement.
Or let's talk about, say, the Pandits who have been killed in Kashmir. Now, that is one incident that has taken place. The struggle in Kashmir is 100 year old, nearly 100 years old now. In
Mhm.
fact, even more if you want to go back further back. But contemporary, the modern, the recent struggle is nearly 100 years old. Now, over this period of 100 years, you cannot use one incident to color our entire movement. Even in the Indian freedom struggle, for example, Prafulla Chaki, Khudiram Bose, these are people who have killed British officers. Even Bhagat Singh has engaged in violence. But the way Indians represent them today is they call them freedom fighters.
Freedom
So
fighter.
the argument I'm trying to make is that you cannot color a struggle merely based on one or two incidents and say that now it is all wrong. Now it is all misogynistic. Now it is all propagandist. We are a people. We have multiple views in Kashmir. Some are problematic, some are good, some are progressive. It's as any society would have. And that is our
You
job
start
as Kashmir.
dehumanizing someone, right? When you make them into a monolith and when you make it into the other, and that's, you're all supposed to speak the same, talk the same, have the same thoughts because you're not a human being, right? And it's easier to then oppress and to colonize when you're not, you don't have that variety of thought or that. So this is a part of that whole colonial um, uh,
One important thing I'd want to say over here that there are issues in Kashmiri society also. We have issues of patriarchy. We have issues of poverty. All these issues as any society would have. But it is not for our oppressor to tell us that, oh, this is wrong. That is for us to fight. We will wage those battles as every society does against poverty, against, because what is the point of a political movement in Kashmir if we cannot rid ourselves of internal oppression as well? That is the dream. We want to live as equal and free human beings. But just before we move on, because I won't end up touching on this point. Then you had asked if there's any anti-war movement in India. It's very fledgling. It's very isolated, very small. Because you see, in India, aggression especially against Pakistan, it is cheered on. It really, people enjoy it. This pro-state fanaticism and language where they openly talk about using nuclear weapons
yeah, on both sides. It's crazy.
on both sides. So it's cheered on. It really, people enjoy this kind of rhetoric. So there isn't much of an anti-war movement. One example I can give you is of a young girl named Gurmeher Kaur, whose father was a soldier. He was killed. He was an Indian soldier who was killed in action, and she came out on a campaign where she held placards to say that my father wasn't killed by Pakistan. My father was killed by the war. So there should be no war, and some on these lines. But she was heavily trolled and heavily attacked by leading Indian celebrities, by Indian cricketers who are the most powerful celebrities in India. So they thought that it is acceptable to attack this young girl who's not even 20 years old. and they use their social media cult to attack her. And she very bravely responded to all of them and gave it back. But my point being that this anti-war movement, it's very small. There are some sections of Indian society that advocate for peace between India and Pakistan, and that is the only, because everyone understands that there is no military solution to these problems. But they do enjoy this rhetoric of war.
I wanted to take you back to Kashmir right now. Now we know that this is a colonial power, and colonial regimes in the past have made sure that intoxicants are widely available to Native populations, and we see that here in the Native Americans in the United States. One of the highest levels of drugs and alcoholism is in the Native population. And it's an attempt to get people addicted and distracted from their political conditions. So right now you have the lockdown, you have the internet lockdown, you have, one soldier to 8 Kashmiris. And then amongst this, and then COVID, and amongst this entire mental health, ticking time bomb, they're now, and the Indian Army has done this by making drugs widely available to youth in Kashmir. We've read several reports on that. And now the government is finding itself investing in alcohol locations serving, selling alcohol before any other measure, like all that rhetoric of bringing prosperity to Kashmir and all of that. So this is how prosperity is being brought to Kashmir?
Well, it depends on how you define prosperity and who this prosperity is for. Then, you see, in Kashmir, no Kashmiri Muslim, I doubt you'd be really hard pressed to find a Kashmiri Muslim who's going to invest in an alcohol shop or run an alcohol business. But liquor is sold in Jammu. It's freely sold in Jammu, where most of Kashmir's alcohol consumption takes place. It's in Jammu. That's where we have a larger non-Muslim population, and that's where alcohol is mostly sold. In Kashmir, liquor is available in very few shops, and the consumption is largely by the Indian soldiers who are present over there. Okay. Now, what you are referring to is a move to open liquor shops in 67, I think, locations in Kashmir. Now, this is being done not for Kashmiris, but for the non-Kashmiri domiciles who are now moving into Kashmir. This creates business opportunities for them, because even if no Kashmiri drinks it, but at least the Indian Army will be drinking it. And of course, liquor consumption and drug abuse has been gradually seeped into Kashmiri society also. Even Kashmiri Muslims have been entrapped right now in this cycle of drug use. So this is something which Kashmiris have raised their voice against, that there is prevalent abuse of drugs taking place and the state is not doing anything to stop it. Does that mean the state is encouraging it? We move into the realm of accusation and conjecture then, because there's nothing to conclusively prove it. And the people who have used arguments where they have said that the army is involved, they have been targeted. Just a few days ago, a young girl, she had spoken out against this. And if you look on social media as well, she has come out and said that her family is being targeted, her brother has been harassed, and her family members have been beaten up. So it is dangerous to even discuss where are all these drugs coming from. But if we were to assess India's history of how they've controlled populations, you just have to look at Punjab. In Punjab, drug abuse had been allowed by state law enforcement agencies by either being lax on catching hold of people who were engaging in drug trafficking, or by engaging in it themselves. Many politicians, many leaders, they have themselves encouraged these practices. So it's not a far-fetched idea to suggest that similar practices may be employed or are already being employed in Kashmir also. But one important thing to mention over here is, in terms of constitutional law, Indians must be reminded that their own constitution, in Article 47 of India's constitution, which is a directive principle of state policy, it states that the state will endeavor to bring about prohibition of the use and trade of alcohol. This is a part of the Indian constitution. But directive principles of state policy are not binding. They are merely suggestive. But when I say that they are suggestive, it does not mean that they have to be disregarded altogether. One more example that I'd want to give you is that some of the alcohol shops that are being opened up, they're very close to religious centers in Kashmir. For example, Tsar-e-Sharif in Kashmir, there's an alcohol shop which is going to be opened up very close by to it. This is just like opening up a beef shop next to a temple. The way Indians would be outraged about this, even Kashmiri Muslims will be outraged about this. So what is happening right now is it's not just it's waging a war on the moral and putative directives of Islam also. The same is the case with LGBTQ rights. The same is the case with women's rights as well, where they try to portray Kashmiris as this irrational, quick to temper, violent, regressive, homophobic being who just does not listen to reason, who just does not understand that what's the harm in having an alcohol shop next to a mosque. Whereas you have to be sensitive about these things. Of course, legally speaking, it's not illegal to have it unless you have a law passed which prohibits alcohol shops within religious establishment, say within 500 meters of religious establishment. There are laws like that in India where you cannot have alcohol shops or tobacco shops within a certain distance of schools, for example. So you can pass a law like that. So what I'm trying to say is that it may not be illegal to do this, but it is definitely immoral.
It pushes buttons, and it might get people out of front. The people who have been patient and have been not on the streets despite everything that has been going on. It almost feels like they want to get some of those mobs out so they can now target them or use that,
yes.
To justify some of their actions.
You'll be very shocked to hear that in Indian army generals, Indian and even some leaders, they have very openly said that why are these Kashmiris just holding stones? I wish they had guns in their hands because then we could kill them. So there is a a strand of thought in India where they want Kashmiris to come out, and not just come out, but take up arms. Because once Kashmiris take up arms, it becomes very easy. No questions will be asked then. There is no, and in any case, even when Kashmiris have not taken up arms, they're young children. They're children as young as a year old whose eyes have been hit with pellets. What arms do you expect that child to have? What threat does this child pose to the nation of India? I have myself come across orders that have been passed, detention orders. For example, one order that I'd come across was of this young boy, whose name is Tajammul. Tajammul was 13 years old when this order was passed against him. And the magistrate recorded that Tajammul is a stigma for peace-loving citizens of this nation. He's a 13-year-old boy who is now being called a stigma for peace-loving citizens of this nation. What is there any application of mind before these orders are passed? So they do. There is a chain of thought which wants to provoke Kashmiris to come out. But for various reasons, this year, there hasn't been that kind of mass protest. There have been different other forms of protest. For example, some Kashmiris refuse to engage in selling their apples, engaging, pretending that everything is normal in Kashmir. There are different ways of protest, and we have engaged in them as well. We have continuously written about it. We have continuously voiced, raised our voices against what is happening.
Art has been used, yes.
Art as well. And there's also been even conventional protest has taken place in Kashmir, but it has not been reported widely. One, because of the internet ban, because there was no free communication for the first 8 months of the lockdown in Kashmir. It's only after February this year, after the Supreme Court intervened and passed a very watered down order requesting the government to reconsider its position. After that, 2G internet speeds were allowed. Then every week they would increase the speed ever so slightly, as if to tell us that, if you guys, it's a very, very paternalistic way of treating us as infants in Kashmir, where every week they give us a little bit more speed of the internet, as if to tell us that if you behave, we'll give you more speed. And if you don't behave, we'll cut off your internet supply.
So this is something else. Before we start wrapping up, I did want to talk a little bit about the roles of the mosques currently. You were talking about religious centers, and there has recently there was destruction in a neighborhood. Could you tell us a little bit more about that, and what happened to the people who have been, and how have mosques reacted to this wave of these attacks on neighborhoods?
A mosque is a very intrinsic part of our society. Every mohalla, every small area in Kashmir has its own mosque. They are spiritual centers. That's where we go to vent. That's where we go to ask for forgiveness, and that's where we go to ask for strength to deal with what is going on. Because seemingly, it doesn't appear as if our oppressors are being taken to task for what they've done. There doesn't seem to be justice in this life. Because till date, very few, despite all the human rights violations that have taken place in Kashmir, everything that's happened, it's hardly any member of the Indian Armed Forces who's serving a jail sentence for
That's true.
all the people that have been killed, or all the people who have been raped, or all the people who have been tortured, everything that's happened in Kashmir. So seemingly there is little justice in this world right now, but we have our hopes, and we have utmost belief, unwavering belief in the fact that we will get justice. And the only person who can give us, the only being who can give us protection, who can keep us safe despite all the oppression that we face, is God Almighty, Allah. So we go to the mosques to get strength to deal with. It gives, even me personally, I'm alone in London. I don't have family over here. I don't have my friend circle here. So the only way I can stay sane is by bowing my head in prayer and asking God to give me guidance, to show me the path. So that is our connection to the mosque and to religion. But in conflict, the mosque is not just a space where we go to pray. It assumes a far bigger role, because it is the place where people congregate, we come together, we can mobilize, we talk. Even in mosques, people, we go. I used to go to my local mosque in Kashmir, and we talk about politics also over there. We talk about what's happening, because we didn't have spaces. We couldn't discuss these things online. We can't discuss these things over telephone networks, which are usually tapped. So mosques become that space of congregation, because otherwise you can't congregate outside. You can't assemble outside.
That's true.
Often there are laws that are that prohibit more than 3 or 4 people from assembling together outside. So mosques adopt that, they take on that role as well. But right in recent days, what you were mentioning of about houses being destroyed, you see, when the armed militants in Kashmir, when they engage Indian soldiers, they often take shelter in houses in Kashmir,
Mm,
civilian houses in Kashmir. Now, whether the civilian has willingly given it or unwillingly given the property is immaterial. But the houses are often destroyed completely by the army. Instead of engaging with the force, with the militants inside, and trying to minimize loss to the civilians around there, they blow up the properties. You will find multiple videos online, quite disheartening. It's very, very hard to see this, because in Kashmir we spend most of our life saving on the education of our children, the marriages of our children, and the houses that we build. So your house is your everything. It is your entire life savings, your memories, everything is attached to it. So you see these videos of them just being blown up.
mm,
Now, once they are blown up, the people who are living over there are rendered homeless. One important thing I should mention over here is that the level of traditional homelessness in Kashmir is very low, because we all have land, and we at most an overwhelming number of Kashmiris have land and property and houses, but some don't. So they are, I think, around a very small number, in the thousands, don't have permanent property in Kashmir, as opposed to India, where there are millions of people who are homeless.
mhm,
But these people now, once they are rendered homeless, once their homes are destroyed, it is in effect a way where the Indian government wants to tell you that this is the price you will pay for tacitly or whether voluntarily or inadvertently supporting the armed uprising. So
mm,
this is the price you will pay. Now, what is happening is, once these people are rendered homeless, if they have relatives, they go to their homes and they stay over there until their house is reconstructed. Or if, in some cases, if there's no family that can support them, they go to the local mosques and stay there. And the mosque becomes a source of shelter also in that case. But more than, you see, because Kashmir is a very closely knit society, uh, everyone is connected. You have family members, maybe someone else will have shelter for you, and people do rise up to these occasions. Just last month, some houses have been destroyed in Srinagar, and within a day, we raised, just within 48 hours, I think, we raised about 50 lakh, about a very significant amount of money to rebuild those properties. And that's how it always happens. The mosques give a call asking for donations, and then the mosque coordinates the rebuilding effort, and people donate from all over. And we know that, it's not, no, if it's them today, it can be us tomorrow. We're
so
all in this together. So there is no difference, and
we're,
you have
I'm
to give
sorry,
time.
we're run out of time. Thank you so much for being here with us. And that was a lovely note and a hopeful note, because being in it together, and despite all the horrific changes and the domicile law, all of that is taking place, the power of the resistance and the power of the Kashmiri people is something that the whole world is in awe of. And we encourage people who are watching and listening, if you aren't a part of this movement and are not a part of the freeing of Kashmir, don't know about Kashmir, learn about it, get involved. There are many organizations on the ground who are working towards this, and to it's just such a beautiful, powerful struggle despite all the odds. So thank you so much for joining us today. Inshallah, we'll be back tomorrow. Assalamu alaikum.